Thank you very much. I am thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be in Portugal. I'm thrilled to be at a conference where people are talking about books. Usually I talk at conferences where people are talking about climate change or they're talking about energy or something like that. It's really great and refreshing to talk to a different crowd in a different kind of way about the work that I do and the work that we all do. Rachel did a great job of talking about how thinking about climate change is going to change how books are made and how we think about the physical objects of books. And I want to talk a little bit about how books are made in a different way, in the sense of how they are written. And I want to say that this is a completely different talk than I had planned yesterday. I had a completely different idea, and poor Sylvia, I had her changing the slides at like midnight last night. Because this idea for what I wanted to talk about today came to me at a talk I gave at the US Embassy hosted me for a talk yesterday at the aquarium. And afterwards, I had some conversations with a number of people. And a couple of questions came up that I thought were really central to what we're talking about here today and what I wanted to talk with you about. And the first one is, why do you write about climate change? Of all things, why do you write books about climate change? And for me, that's a pretty simple response, which is I think it's the most important story of our time. I think it's the grand narrative of civilization at our time. And for me as a journalist, I've been writing about it for 25 years. It is the most fascinating, most interesting, most ever-changing, most high-stakes narrative that there is out there. I know there are a lot of other things in the headlines, from the orange man who's running for president in the United States, to what's going on in Ukraine, to all kinds of things. But to me, even after 25 years, climate change is the overarching narrative, the thing that our idea of civilization is most dependent upon, and how that will play out is, to me, as a writer, endlessly fascinating. But then this same person I was talking to yesterday said, well, but how do you write a bestseller, and my book was a New York Times bestseller for a month or so, about such a depressing subject that nobody wants to read about? How do you do that? And I thought, well, that's an interesting question, and maybe it's of relevance when we think about Book 2.0 and the future of books, is how do you write a book about something like this that is so many people recoil from? It's not like, oh, here's Taylor Swift's love life, you know, are you interested? That's not how people react to stories about climate change, right? And so if we're going to think about a future where climate change is more and more important for readers and more important in our lives, how is it going to change how we think about books? And I do not presume in any way to be like, you know, have the answers. All I can tell you is about how I think about it and how I thought about it for this book. And the first thing is about science, right? One of the problems with climate change books and writing about these kinds of subjects is people are scared of science. It freaks them out. This freaks people out, right? This is really important graphs, data about all kinds of things that are happening in the energy and climate world. You put it on a page, people run for the hills. It's like, you know, you immediately are doomed as a writer as soon as you do anything like this, right? And so I feel like my job as a writer is to understand what every little wiggle on that graph and 12 million other graphs and data and charts and papers are about, and then forget them. Not forget them in the sense of ignore them, but incorporate them into the narrative, into the argument, into the stories that I'm telling, and to inoculate the reader against the terrors of data and science, which are just killers, right, for most people. And I work very hard in my books to do that, but at the same time, of course, it informs every page and every paragraph. So it's almost this sort of metabolic process that I have to go through as a writer to digest all this stuff and then put it out in a different way. The second thing I think books like about climate change and about these kinds of subjects don't do enough are be provocative. In order to stimulate people's interests in these kinds of subjects, you have to be provocative about it. You have to have an idea, you have to have a thesis, you have to have an argument. You have to make people want to listen and debate you about it and think about it. And for me, this came to me in the middle of the night at 3 in the morning when I woke up, and I thought, oh, I have a great title for my book, The Heat Will Kill You First. And I, of course, was very excited. And I called my publisher, Little Brown in the United States, in the morning. I said, finally got a great title. And my editor said, what? And I said, The Heat Will Kill You First. And he's like, no. No way are you calling your book The Heat Will Kill You First. Nobody will buy that. They took it to the marketing people. They're like, no, Jeff is not titling the book The Heat Will Kill You First. That's not happening. And I said, well, wait a minute. Let's talk about this a little bit. And I explained to them why I wanted to call the book The Heat Will Kill You First. Because I think that a lot of writing and thinking about climate change is something that is like stuck in this sort of do-gooder ghetto. It's like, oh yeah, we care about ice sheets that are far away, or we care about our children's future, or we care about, the forest fires that are burning somewhere, and maybe we see some smoke, but it's all very distant and very like, yeah, there are a lot of other problems. My car has a flat tire, and my kid's homework is due, and it's just like on the periphery of our consciousness, even for people who care about it. And one of the goals of this book, and one of the actual theses of this book, is the heat will kill you very quickly. It almost happened to me, and that's why I wrote the book. I was running down a street in Phoenix in 2017. I wasn't paying attention to how hot it was. I ran 20 blocks. My heart practically exploded out of my chest. I got really dizzy. I started hallucinating, and I thought, oh my God, this is dangerous. If I had to do this another 20 blocks, who knows what would happen? And that might sound like a kind of banal thing to say, but I had been a climate reporter for 15 years at that time, and it still never occurred to me how dangerous heat is to a person, to their actual lives, like right now, that it could kill me. And that's what I wanted to communicate with this title. I wanted it to be a challenge to you, to say that this is dangerous to you right now, and to inject this into your life in a personal way. So finally, obviously, I won the battle with my publisher, and you can judge for yourself whether or not you think it's a good title or not, but it was a bestseller, and I've had a lot of people come up to me and talk about that. And the reason it works is because it plays into this thesis of the book of, you need to think about heat in a different way. It's not about better beach weather, right? It's not about getting a nicer suntan. It's about this, what I call in the book, this predatory force of extreme heat that is kind of coming for us all. The third thing that I think is really important that I think of is writing it like a novel, but making sure it's not a novel, right? It needs to be narrative, nonfiction, and it needs to be nonfiction. And writing a book like mine about climate change, the facts, the data, the stuff that I talked about in number one, of understanding this data is really important. But it's also important to tell stories. That's how we learn. That's how humans have communicated about like the scary monsters that are over on the other side of the wall for thousands and thousands of years. And I really try hard to reconnect to the storytelling world in writing about climate change. I want to tell you stories about things that have happened and things that have happened to me. And in those stories, there's, it's like the medicine with the sugar. I have a lot of climate science and things like that, but I don't put it in charts and graphs. And it's woven into these sort of larger narratives. And just one example of this is I start my book with a story of this family who, in their 40s, healthy young family, who had just moved out of Silicon Valley during the pandemic, moved to the hills, the mountains in California, went for a 7-kilometer hike on a hot day. The next day, search party, they didn't come home, their friends got worried, search party came out, they were all dead on the trail. The husband, the wife, the child, and their dog, all just laying there dead. And it took the investigators literally a month to figure out what had happened, that they had all died of heat stroke. And it's a very tragic story, but I opened the book with it, and you can read the book and hear all the nuances of it. But I really wanted to communicate through a tragic narrative, in this case, that we are all vulnerable, even people who think that they're not. It's not just, your 97-year-old grandmother who is living in an apartment without air conditioning during a heat wave, or the people who are working out on the highways during extreme heat waves, or the sort of more obviously vulnerable people. I wanted it to be in every person's story. And that's how the book starts, and that is the sort of idea that I try to carry through. And number 4, I want to add, this is the last one, but I have one I want to add, because I mentioned that I thought about this last night at 11 o'clock at night. And so, as like every writer, I keep revising, and I'm revising on the spot. And the other thing that I would put in here is the importance of usefulness. That I think of my book as a sort of survival guide to a world of climate change and extreme heat. And so I think these sort of narratives and stories need to be useful in ways that can help you understand what to do and how to handle things and how you need to change your lives for this new climate that we have created for ourselves. And then just to wrap this up, the last thing is, this is, as I've mentioned, for me, about storytelling. And stories need to end well. And this is a real challenge for climate, right? It's like, oh, and then we all drive electric cars and everything's fine. That is not a real narrative. That is not a real ending, right? And so how do you tell a story about climate change that does not feel phony, fake, full of bullshit hope, and real, and really can help readers understand a vision for a better future? Because I really do believe that climate change is obviously going to cause a lot of suffering and loss, but it's also a tremendous opportunity to reimagine our world. And we're going to do that anyway. We're going to have to do that because the seas are going to rise, the heat's going to keep getting hotter, the fires are going to keep getting bigger. All this is going to continue happening until we stop burning fossil fuels. And even then, it's not going back, right? We're permanently creating this newer, hotter climate. So we better get used to it, and we better think about what that's going to look like. And the challenge is to think about this as an opportunity to get rid of a lot of stupid stuff that we've done and reimagine a city like Lisbon or a city like Paris or a city like Austin, Texas, where I live, that is accommodating to this new climate, that allows the spirit of innovation and creativity to flourish. People always ask me, you've been writing about climate change for 20 years. Why are you not living in your basement, drinking tequila, scrawling on the wall with crayons about the lost world for your children? And it's because I meet incredible people every day who are incredibly inspired about thinking differently, about changing how we build buildings, changing how we move around, whether it's through public transportation or electric vehicles, people who are politically active, who are working hard to change the political system to recognize these risks. It is a world full of inspiring people. And that's why I've continued on this beat for so long and why I can't wait to write the next book. And, I really do think that when we reimagine our world for the 21st century, for the climate that we've created, there's a tremendous opportunity. And the challenge in writing these kinds of climate stories is to communicate that without it seeming easy or fake, or just as communicating the scope and scale of the risks is really hard. communicating the scope and scale of the opportunities is really hard. But I think that's what you have to do, because anybody who picks up a book and just like gets to the end and like, okay, where's the rope? I'm going to go hang myself. That is not an effective narrative, right? It may be in some cases, but it's not the kind of book that I want to write, right? So that's the hard challenge of doing the kind of book that I've written here, and that's what I've tried to do. I'm showing you this picture of these shade structures that are at a museum. They just were built at a Blanton Museum of Art in Austin, Texas, where my wife happens to be the director. But they're these shade structures that turn this frying pan-like courtyard around the museum into this beautiful landscape with these petal-like sculptures that create this dappled shade. And this space it's just a size of a football field kind of plaza, but it turned it in from this place that you didn't even want to walk across because you were afraid you might die before you get to the other side, into this place where everybody hangs out, and it's like a community hangout now, and there's people there all the time, and it transformed the space just because they thought differently about how they designed this place. And that's a perfect metaphor for what we need to do with our world. And that's what we need to do with how we produce books, but also how we produce narratives and how we tell stories about this new world that we need to create. There is better ways. There is a world of possibilities that we have not even begun to explore. And it's my job to help all of you do that, and it's our job in the publishing world to help the rest of the world do that. And thank you very much.